to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the future. Welcome to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington, and tonight we're going to be talking about the 2027 class and some of the players that we expect to make it, some of the players that maybe we expect not to make it, and all that and more. But you know I can't do it by myself, so I'm going to bring on Andy Starr and Aaron Wilcox. Andy, how are you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing well. I just spent all day at Cedar Point, which if you don't know what that is, it's like a Six Flags of Ohio, riding roller coasters. My daughters had like a class trip that I was chaperoning on, so I got to go for free. I'm pretty exhausted, but I am ready to do a little Devy Dynasty talk here, which is always fun. Nice way to, relax after a long day of having fun on roller coasters.
Yeah, that's fun, but at least you don't have to walk anymore. So that'll be
exactly.
You can just sit here and talk a little bit instead of all the steps that go in. You already met your step quota for the day.
I got him in today.
Aaron, fishing all weekend. What'd you catch?
Yeah, a couple of bass, northern pike. It was a lot of fun just to get out up to the cabin, out in the woods, being one with nature, all of that. I am kind of jealous of Andy, though. Getting some time at the amusement park and some roller coasters and whatnot, and hopefully none of our takes make you queasy again here tonight, Andy.
Hopefully not. I've heard of Cedar Point. I've never been to it. I do wonder. We have Disney and Adventure Island, or what is it called? The other one, I can't even think of it now. But
Universal
Universal. Thank you. We have all of those. We also have Busch Gardens right next to me in Tampa. So we have quite a few roller coasters and amusement parks and all that, but never been to Cedar Point. So I kind of wonder how it holds up compared to those kind of things.
Well, I can tell you that Cedar Point is America's roller coast. That's like all they have there. The theme is roller coasters. So there's, I couldn't even give you the number, but I would say between like 15 and 20 roller coasters that you can ride at this place. So it's a lot of fun. It's not as fun when you're doing it with a bunch of 11-year-olds because they're not down to do like Top Thrill Dragster, which is like the one that goes 120 miles an hour straight into the sky. They're like, yeah, I'm not doing that one. But, it's still fun. Like, it's still roller coasters. You can't not have a good time.
Yeah, that was great. Actually, it kind of reminds me of Busch Gardens because it's gotten to the point where they don't even have that many other features or attractions or anything. It's basically like 10 to 15 roller coasters, and then you have like a couple of an ice show and stuff like that. But essentially, it's just the roller coasters. So enough about theme parks. And like Aaron said, hopefully we don't make you queasy here, but hopefully you don't feel like you're going up and down a roller coaster with our takes. But tonight we wanted to look more toward the future. Obviously, we've done a lot of, looking at the present, saying, hey, what are these rookies going to do? Now, we said, hey, what are, looking at C2C rosters, what's going to happen this year, that kind of thing. But, along with that, obviously comes next year's class. And we didn't want to just say, oh, let's just do a draft. Let's do a way too early 2027 mock draft, because that's great. And those are fun. And we get a lot of clicks and views and all that kind of stuff. And we'll definitely do that in the future. But we kind of wanted to just talk about the class in general and then get into some of the players that we think will actually make it, more so than even just like, I like this player. Well, I like this player can mean anything. That can mean I like him as a sleeper. He's going to be a 5th round pick. Or, I like this player. He's going to be the 101 in the 2027 draft class. It's a little bit different. So that's what we're going to be kind of focusing on tonight is, the higher end talent players like that. But we wanted to start out with the class in general. We'll get into the names here in a little bit. But the 2027 class has been called everything, every synonym of generational, the greatest of all time, one of the best since 2017 and everything else, everything in between there. Uh, are you agreeing with that? Are people getting out over their skis, or what do you think, Aaron?
No, I mean, people are overreacting, and we always think the next class is going to be better. We think that, a ton of guys are going to emerge, and hey, some will, but guys will also falter, or they'll stay in college for another season, or there's many different reasons ultimately why next year's class probably won't shake up to be quite as great as we expect it to be. But that doesn't mean it won't be better than this season's or this year's class. So the 2026 class obviously had some flaws there at the quarterback position after Mendoza. Obviously after Jeremiah Love too, definitely some flaws at the running back position. And so we're looking at maybe some slight upgrades overall at those positions next year. And we'll see how things end up at the wide receiver position ultimately, but I'm excited for that this next year too. And maybe even a couple of tight ends emerge as well. So I think, covering some of the high end guys and projecting that first round draft capital here is going to be a lot of fun.
Andy, we've heard that there's going to be 16 first-round QBs in the 2027 class. Are you sticking with that number, or do you have something slightly different for us?
I mean, I can jump into it right now if you want, but I think 16 is obviously a little bit too high. This year was obviously down from a quarterback standpoint, from a lot of standpoints. So I am hopeful and optimistic that next year will be an improvement on this year. Not necessarily from like a number of first round draft picks for some of these positions. Obviously, running back, it's going to be a stretch to replicate what we saw this year with two of them going in the first round. Even tight ends, like having two first round tight ends, which I guess we only had one this year, right? Sadiq was the only one. But having anything more than one is kind of rare for that position. But I am hopeful that the quarterbacks can kind of resurrect I won't say this class, because this class is obviously something we're excited about, but maybe like resurrect our hope in having like a good Dynasty rookie class once again.
Yeah, and I think there will be at least a few QBs that'll help us out here and push down some players and everything. But what I wanted to ask you guys before we got into exactly how many we have and all that kind of stuff is, what can people do differently? Obviously, I know my answer, but I want to know what you guys think. What can people do differently to not get caught up in the QBs that maybe flash for college purposes, but are you can almost tell, at least we've been doing this for a long time, we generally can tell, okay, that player's never going to be an NFL talent, or he's, or it's going to have to take the perfect scheme, the perfect fit or whatever for him to even be startable in the NFL, that kind of thing. Like right now, obviously, a very on the nose is Brennan Sorsby, got denied by the NCAA today. So he's not, I mean, obviously he can fight it, he can, whatever, but I'm sure he will. But essentially, his options are going to the supplemental draft or waiting till next year's draft. And there's people saying he would have been a first round pick in this draft and all that kind of stuff. And here I am sitting here with Brennan Sorsby as like my QB 36 in Devy Beth. And I'm like, what are we talking about? He was never good. I know Aaron had a little bit of hope for him at one point, but that fell off a cliff pretty quickly. And I don't think you're holding out any hope for him any longer. You haven't really made any big takes recently saying that you still believed in him, but I know there was a time when you did, but that was probably last off season or maybe very very early in the 2025 season. But what analytically, it seems pretty easy to say like this guy's never going to be something. Maybe it's a more of a film watcher thing, but like what can we do? There was people telling me that Garrett Nussmeier was going to be the QB2 in the class and things like that, and then he gets drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft. Like, why do we have to do this every year? I guess is my first question. And then what can people do differently to not fall in love with these college only players?
Yeah, well, I can go ahead and just adjust the Sorsby, I guess, intrigue. And that was always like from a campus to campus standpoint when you're looking for college production. I love scooping him up at the very end of drafts, and that was very lucrative for me for a time. But obviously, if he's going to miss this season in college football, which I think he just got denied today by the NCAA, yeah, probably have to declare for the supplemental draft. And yeah, I don't think he's some sort of like great NFL type of quarterback prospect. Like he's a capable backup somewhere, but at this rate, yeah, not holding out a lot of hope. But how can we identify guys like, well, I wouldn't even say like that, but just in general, guys who are not cutting it at the NFL level? And I look at a couple things. I mean, from a metric standpoint, I'm sure John and Andy can talk a little bit more the specific metrics and analytical measures that go into it. But if guys are really turnover prone, that has a hard time of correcting itself. If they're even going back to high school and college, if they just throw tons of picks every year, it just doesn't end up working out very often for those guys at the NFL level to keep jobs, to even get jobs in the first place. And then also just I don't tend to put too much stock just in this stat alone, but like the completion percentage itself. If guys are just super inaccurate, it might go into interceptions showing up or might not on a given year. But if they're super inaccurate, I do not love that. And of course, if they're dink and dunk type of quarterbacks, that's not attractive either. You want guys who are driving the ball downfield, have capable arms, and you look for that in the film and also in the production metrics. So those are some big things that I look for and try to screen out, or at least make sure the guys who are kind of, maybe on the edge of hitting those metrics or hitting those marks on film, at least that they have some other traits, the athleticism, maybe the testing that they're going to display. Maybe it's crazy arm strength or something like that to kind of save that profile when it's borderline. But yeah, when those guys are just missing a lot of those key marks, I'm pretty much out.
Yeah, Andy, are you looking for similar things, or do you have specific stats that like
Yeah.
obviously I know I've talked about thresholds in the past of like big time throw rate and things like that I'm like, if you don't hit this, I almost just scratch you off, write you off the list, to start with.
Yeah, well, I like in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing like the 10-10 rule. Like I want them to be right near 10 yards per attempt, right near 10 yards a dot for a quarterback. And generally, obviously, if somebody's doing a whole season with those numbers, their completion percentage, if it's super low, they're probably not going to remain in that starting position very long. So if you can get a full season of work with that kind of throwing the ball downfield and completing passes, the touchdowns are kind of irrelevant to me at that point in time. I can kind of boil it down with a guy like Sorsby, why he's just being talked about as like he would have been a first round pick this year. And it's kind of, I won't say it's exactly like Anthony Richardson, but this is a guy who ran for 9 touchdowns and 600 yards last year. I think that a lot of dynasty managers see this ground production and they get that Konami code idea in their mind, like this is a dual threat quarterback. He's going to score me points on the ground. None of that matters if you're not a good passer in the NFL. Like you could run for 1,000 yards every single season in college and run for 20 touchdowns. If you can't pass in the NFL, it's not going to work. It's not going to work like it does in college, like it would in the Big 12, like Brendan Sorsby was able to do. And I'm not saying Brendan Sorsby had a bad season last year. I think if he put it together at Texas Tech this year and had another solid season, he could have been a first round pick. He had to improve a few things. He had to, like I said, improve that ADOT, improve the completion percentage a little bit, but which would have helped his yards per attempt get to where it needed to be, and things could have turned around for him. But where as it stands right now, he's not meeting any of those thresholds. So just because a guy's running for 600 yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground, which is great, doesn't mean that he's going to do that in the NFL, because he won't have that dimension because teams are going to make it so he can't pass at all because he's not a playmaker in that aspect of the game yet. So that's where I would draw the line, and it's something that I can't really back it up with any sort of like film review or anything. That's just what I've noticed when I'm looking at these quarterbacks who are dynamic in other aspects of the game, but not really at the level they need to be passing when you're looking at the metrics.
Yeah, honestly, I think I've I've gotten to the point where maybe I've just been staring at these QBs for so long and looking at the numbers for so long that it's almost like the Matrix where it drops down. You just I can see it all there with it. But that's looking at Beth. I think you can actually dumb it down even more. You can take away big time throw rate. You can take away all the advanced analytics and everything. You can just go to sportsreference.com and just type in Brendan Sorsby or any QB for that matter. But in this instance, obviously we're talking about Sorsby, and just I look at a few things. Aaron, both of you mentioned completion rate. Aaron mentioned interception rate is one of the first things that he looks at. Adjusted yards per attempt is one of the most important things, or the easiest ways to tell, and that accounts for everything. That accounts for yards, completion rate, touchdowns, everything. So adjusted yards per attempt is really an important metric that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And I think Andy had mentioned it with his 10 and 10. Is that adjusted yards per attempt, or is that just yards per attempt?
I usually just look at yards per attempt, and I kind of have leeway with that. You know, I'll let it slip down to like 9, but once you start getting into the eights, that's when it really gets into the danger zone of it's not a player that I want to really mess with. But if you do adjusted yards per attempt, then you are gonna see those safer prospects hit that 10 number a lot more frequently.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I even nine and a half is kind of my lowest level that I'll even accept. Like a Daniel Jones level prospect had I want to say he had 9.5 adjusted yards per attempt in his at least his last season or maybe he throughout his career or whatever it was. And that's kind of like the bare minimum that I'm looking for. But in like Brendan Sorsby's case, he was at 7.35, and then this year in his fourth season in college in the Big 12, he finally hit 9.27 adjusted yards per attempt. I can look at that, and even with the good interception rate, with the decent completion rate, I'm looking at those things and I'm saying, okay, that's okay. Those numbers are okay, but it's his fourth year where he finally kind of hit those levels. And then we look at it and we say it's the Big 12. Well, you got to knock the Big 12, especially now. Big 12 is not even what it used to be per se. So now we have to knock that even more. And so it's just all I'm looking at is sports reference. I'm not looking at big time throw rate. I'm not looking at major advanced analytics that you have to pay for or anything like that. This is a free website. And I can tell you that Brendan Sorsby has a long way to being a starting QB. And we can do that with so many other players, including Garrett Nussmeier and every other player that, that people were falling in love with. When people were telling me that Drew Allar was going to be the QB1 in this class for the last 3-4 years, it was really easy to just go to Sports Reference and say, nope, no, he's not. So I think when you start finding yourself falling in love with a QB for college purposes, which is easy to do, especially if you're in C2C, if you're in Devy, that kind of stuff is easy to do. I would say sometimes just go back to the basics and maybe get away from some of the advanced analytics and just go back to the basics and say, what does the interception rate look like? What does the yardage look like? What does the adjusted yards per attempt look like? That kind of stuff. And then obviously, what does the completion rate look like? And then you can kind of build from there. If you see those numbers are looking great, okay, well maybe you found yourself a solid QB, and you can kind of build from there and figure out, are they going to be truly good? Like we're going to talk about here in just a second. So Andy, I guess we kind of started us off with QBs here. How many QBs are meeting those thresholds? How many QBs are meeting these numbers, whether basic or advanced?
Right now, I think there's only 3 that are. I know I don't have my PFF pulled up right now or anything. I just sort of wrote down some names, but I think right now it's C.J. Carr, Julian Sayin, and Darian Mensah. And Arch was getting there. Like if the season was a couple more games, I think he probably would have been at a more comfortable spot than where he was now. So, I'm actually a little bit softer on Arch than a lot of people. I think most people have just said, he's going to be QB1. I'm really more comfortable with all three of those guys that I just mentioned than I am with Arch. Now, obviously, a lot of things can change right now, and I'm certainly not saying I'm out on Arch Manning or anything, but I'm more concerned about Arch Manning than I am about these other three. Having said that, I'm generally not right on everybody, and I generally will miss somebody that, a Fernando Mendoza comes out of nowhere, or a Cam Ward, all of a sudden becomes the number one overall pick after a crazy season. So there's always that chance too. So that's where I kind of land on, like, I think there's probably going to be about 4 first round quarterbacks next year, which tracks with the average, which is like 3.5 to between 3 and 4 essentially on any given season. You're going to get 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the first round. This year was obviously only 2. It was a down year. I think we're going to get back to that average. What those names are, like I said, I feel like I'm most comfortable saying Carr, Sayan, and Mensa, and even Arch to an extent. I feel like between Carr, Sayan, and Mensa, particularly Carr and Sayan, one of those guys is probably likely to go back for a 4th season, or just doesn't have the greatest 3rd year and falls out of the first round for whatever reason. So I think 3 out of those 4 guys that I mentioned, and then like I said, there's always a guy that I don't really expect to do what he does in his final season and ends up being a first round pick. So I'm just going to go ahead and project that there's one of those people as well.
I like it, Aaron. Are you feeling the same way? We don't even have to necessarily get into the ranks of the players just yet, but you thinking 3, 4, 5, 16. What you got?
Yeah. Well, that was very humble of Andy to say that he doesn't get everything right. But no, there's a lot of ambiguity to the projecting any draft capital, that's for sure, in future years. And I will say that, the typical amounts of quarterbacks in a decent class, like Andy was saying, is like 3.5-ish in that range. So that makes this hard to pick. I initially was going to pick 3, but I think I'm going to go 4 as well, because there was even a name that Andy didn't mention there, and that's Dante Moore, who I'm not even a Dante Moore fan, right? This is not me saying he should. This is me saying that he very well could, that the NFL could, take a shot on him based on the success that Oregon will likely have again this season, with a little bit more reliance, you would think, on that passing game. So, but yeah, I think the names that Andy shouted out there are relevant. Arch, Darian Mensah, Julian Sayin, CJ Carr, maybe Lenora Sellers. There's a few other guys who could definitely rise up who have some traits. It's just they need an excellent season. But I could see it happening where I'm willing to go with 4 as the projection for the first round quarterbacks in the 2027 class.
Yeah, I like it. So as it is right now, if I was just going off of Devy Best ranks, if I could speak, I have 3 that I would say are guaranteed, and obviously one, like Andy was saying, like there's a lot of football left to play. We cannot guarantee any of these players yet, but if I had to, I would say I have 3. Now that being said, I do not have a single QB, and this isn't even just for the 2027 class. I don't have a single tier 1 QB in Devy Beth right now. So none of those QBs are actually hitting the tier 1 thresholds just yet. And, that's even me being an Arch fan and wanting Arch to succeed and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that doesn't change his numbers. So, but yeah, I would say that I have a great feeling about 3 of these players making it to the NFL next year. Then I have a 4th that I would probably lean towards could go back, but obviously could come out if he gets good enough, if he hears good things from the NFL, that kind of thing. And then I would say I have 2 more that could, that whether they need to take a step forward, they need, things to work out great this year, or, the NFL to fall in love with them, whatever it might be. I would say there's 2 more that could. Everyone else, I would basically just about say, like, sorry guys, like it's just not going to work out. So I guess technically I could say we could see as many as 6. But if I was betting, if I was betting it today, I think I would go 4 because I'll give a little bit of leeway where maybe one falls out, one takes a step forward, that kind of thing. So I think I'm sitting there with 4, but I feel really good about 3 of them.
Well, we were very controversial there, huh? A lot of disagreements.
Not only were we chalky with each other, we were chalky with like the league average over the last 7 drafts. So.
Yeah. So we're. I mean,
But I mean, it makes sense for this class. So I don't think that we're just saying that because it's the easy answer. I think it actually makes sense for this draft class with the names that we've got so far.
Well, yeah, and so Andy already went into his names. I'll go ahead and give mine to give the context of the players I was talking about. I have Arch, Darian Mensah, and Julian Sayin as my top 3 that I feel are guaranteed to make it. Now, any of them could stay. Especially nowadays with the NIL era and everything. I mean, people have said that Arch was going to stay no matter what because he's going to get paid so much money. Why not just stay in college? It's going to be really tough if they're throwing their 101 at him and saying, hey, you're going to go be the QB of the future and get a $70 million contract or whatever. That's going to be really tough for him to pass up. But there is a chance that any of those 3 players stays in school. Besides Mensah, he'll obviously be coming out. He's not going to be staying. I don't think. But Mensah is my QB2. So we got to make sure that we get our Mensah love out there because he doesn't get nearly enough. So got to make sure that. I have CJ Carr in that tier break where I think he only has 299 attempts so far, which is the lowest of any of the top I think 6 or 7 QBs. That are in this list. Yeah, any of the other QBs, he has by far the lowest amount of attempts. So I could see him staying another year, especially if Notre Dame really looks like, hey, they could keep things rolling the way they have been. They've been getting, pretty damn close to the championship and everything. So I could see CJ Carr staying another year, especially he doesn't have the rushing ability and things like that that the NFL is more coveting nowadays. So maybe the NFL won't say, hey, you're going to be a top 10 QB or whatever. And so maybe he just stays another year. And then I have Lenore Sellers and Dante Moore, and that could take a step forward, but they need to take a step forward for me to actually care about them and be willing to invest any kind of draft capital into them. I believe that Lenore Sellers will take a step forward this year because you almost have to with how bad South Carolina was last year and their offensive line and everything. And then, everything they've brought in from what I hear, and I don't do coaching analysis and stuff like that, but from what I hear, things are supposed to be better this year for South Carolina. So hopefully that'll be true. I almost feel like the opposite for Dante Moore. I don't know that things are going to get better. They had such an easy schedule last year that I don't know how things could get easier for them this year or better for him this year. If anything, I think he's actually going to fall off because they're probably going to have at least a slightly more difficult schedule. The only thing you could really say is, if he has a fully healthy year of Decorian Moore as a second-year player and things, maybe they could take a step forward as an offense. And I'll give him credit for that. Maybe it's possible. I don't truly believe in Dante Moore, though, so I would definitely be leaning away from that. And that's why I'm not willing to really put my stamp. I wanted to say 5. I really did. But as I was sitting there, I'm like, I could see CJ Carr staying. And then if Lenore Sellers takes a step forward, but Dante Moore doesn't, that's, you're still sitting there at 4. I'm like, nah, I don't really love it.
Well, right, and every year there are guys. Andy already showed out a couple names like Cam Ward, but then there's the Jaden Daniels, and there's the Michael Penix, the Bo Nix, the guys who have been there years in college of experience, and they kind of just sneak up on us and have that excellent last season, or maybe their team goes on a run or whatever the case is. And so, if you can pick out players who, yeah, maybe are going to be on successful teams and or have that really good breakout last season, I think you have a chance there. And so maybe that is, I'm not saying he should be, like he hasn't earned it yet, but maybe a Jaden Maeva at USC. Maybe he takes that step forwards and a team actually invests in him pretty highly. Or you could look at Sam Levitt at LSU. Again, I'm not the biggest Levitt guy, but maybe a team out there will like that. Or the traits of like CJ Bailey at NC State, or the mobility of a guy like Trinidad Chavlis at Ole Miss. I think those guys, by no means are they these clean, perfect prospects, but every couple of years we get these guys who couldn't come out of nowhere. Even Mendoza, to a degree, was like that this season. Just right system, right time, maximized his abilities and development, and here we are. He's going first overall in the draft. So there could be another guy, like we've been saying, who sneaks in to the first round conversation. That's for sure.
Well, yeah. Well, I want to be clear because I said I don't have a tier 1 prospect right now, as of right now. That could change, and now like in the great years, like we had the Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels year. Like we knew Caleb Williams and Drake May were who they were going into their final season, their junior season. Yeah, Jaden Daniels took a major step up in his 5th year. But there was already signs that like things were getting better for him at LSU and stuff like that. I mean, I was all in on Jaden Daniels. Maybe not. I didn't think he was going to have a 13.5 adjusted yards per attempt season or anything like that. But I did expect him to take a step forward in year 2 of that team, and year 2 being in that offense at LSU and that kind of thing. So there was reasons to believe in these players. And yet, we just don't have that. We don't have those tier 1 players already. And so it's like, everyone has to earn. Arch has to earn. Julian Sayin has to earn and show that he can do it without Carnell Tate. Even though he still has plenty of, good players around him, he has to prove that he can do that. Darian Mintz is transferring over. He has to prove that he can learn a new offense and play with newer players. Obviously, he still has 1 or 2 that are they're the same, but they all really have to take a step forward. And that being said, like I have CJ Carr like a tier break below those top 3, and then I have Lenore Sellers and Dante Moore a tier break below him. So I mean, you're really saying like anyone else is going to have to take a major step forward. This isn't like, if we get Devin Dampier to take a little step forward or something. Like, no, he has to take a pretty major step forward for you to be like, oh, he can actually be a Devy viable or NFL viable QB. And that goes with Maeva and any of those, Levitt and any of those other players as well. So that's why I love talking in tiers, because it makes it so much easier, at least the way that I'm conveying it, that like there's a lot of work to be done for these QBs to really become like the next big stars.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, nothing else I want to add to that.
All right. Well, then why don't you start us off with whatever position you feel like? Running backs, wide receivers, maybe some tight end talk, little IDP talk. What you got for us?
Ooh, tight ends. Yeah, you know me. I'll bring up a tight end. I'll go with 1. That's my prediction. Okay, we will have 1, and because that's been pretty consistent here for years. I mean, this year was Sadiq.
Yeah.
Then 2025, we actually had 2, Loveland and Morin. But then it was Bowers. Then it was Kincaid. Then it was McBride, Pitts, and then 2020 was the weird year where there was no round 1 tight end. I remember there was some questionable guys like the Cole Kmet and Keen, Troutman, Albert O. Like, it was just a optimal class. It was pretty gross. So this year, there's a few guys I would consider that could sneak their way in, but I'll ultimately go with 1 as a projection. And if I had to say who that is, I'll say Jamari Johnson, Oregon tight end. I think if Kenyon Sadiq can get first-round draft capital, Jamari Johnson's not going to test like that because Sadiq is such a unique player. And so, I mean, you guys know I was high on Sadiq getting first-round draft capital last year. Obviously, Jamari Johnson has put up even stronger production to this point, or at least more promising down the field production as a receiving option at the tight end position. So I think, yeah, Jamari makes a lot of sense there as a round 1 tight end, but there's contenders for other day 1 tight ends who will emerge in this class as well.
Well, I was 100% kidding about tight end, but you went there, so let's do it. I'm gonna go two. I'm gonna go two first round tight ends. I really do like Jamari Johnson. I do actually think that he's a better tight end than Kenyon Sadiq. You can say Sadiq is a better athlete, and I will absolutely give him that 100%. And we once again we've talked about it before. Sadiq is extremely young. I think he can grow into a really good NFL player. It's going to take a couple of years. But as a prospect, I believe Jamari Johnson is a better prospect than Kenyon Sadiq is. I also believe that DJ Vaname is a better prospect than Jamari Johnson, and and maybe he doesn't come out as a junior. So like obviously that's a easy way for this to be wrong. But I do believe, and I actually just realized that I'm actually discounting Vaname a little bit. Like he should actually be a little higher in my. For some reason, I had him listed with the wrong conference, and so it's actually listing him as a Pac-12 player, which is discounting him, and he's still the tight end one in Devy Beth even with that discount. So he's actually should be a little bit higher, but. I mean, he's already hitting thresholds as a sophomore. I mean, I'm looking at sophomore, freshman and sophomore numbers. He's already hitting numbers that are substantially better than Kenyon Sadiq's in what he did as a junior with his A dot, his yards per reception, his PPR points per touch, even his market share, 23% already. And obviously we don't get excited about Iowa as an offense, but he's still hitting that 23% market share as a sophomore. What's he going to do as a junior? I could easily see him being a tight end or, a first round tight end in the NFL draft, and one that I would be very excited to draft. Unlike Kenyon Sadiq, who I was not a big fan of, and I drafted literally 0 shares out of my, I think 25. I was in 30. Now I think I'm in like 25 leagues. So 25 dynasty leagues. I got 0 shares of Kenyon Sadiq.
Yeah. I think I have 1 share of Kenyon Sadiq, and it was from the orphan that Aaron gave to me. But it's like a 2 tight end league, so I wasn't too upset about it. Uh, but I'm gonna agree with John, but not because I think he's right, just because I think I want to be part of the hot take that DJ Vonamy is gonna be a first round tight end, and I don't want him to have that all to himself. So I will also say two, but more likely, it's probably going to be one just because that's how the NFL draft tends to go. But I'm jumping on board with the DJ Vonamy hot take uh, train, and we'll say two, and we'll say Vonamy, and I think I'm in lockstep with you guys about Jamari Johnson. I think he makes the most sense as like a potential first round tight end in 2027. I think he's already got the steam behind him to with the draft nicks and the film people, like he's already there. He's getting it in the way too early 2027 mock drafts there. I don't think he's going to do anything to change that next year. He's just, if anything, going to improve on that. So let's lock him in as a first round pick and then get spicy and say Vonamy really propels himself to become an early declare tight end, which, it seems like that's hard to come by these days as well too, unless it's like a Bowers tier, or you're like a super athlete like Kenyon Sadiq who has all the steam from the media behind him. So yeah, I'll go two, and I don't think we need to go much further on the tight ends.
No, I will say there is a chance that that Boname stays in school, but there's also a chance that Trey Green takes a step forward and becomes that tight end too as well. I think people are overhyping Green, a la like Kenyon Sadiq from last year, but I also think he could take a step forward and become that guy. But I think that's enough about the tight ends. You said I was joking, but Aaron brought us there, so we had to do a little tight end talk there. But what we're already here. I'm here on the wide receiver screen because I have them together, the tight ends and the wide receivers. So why don't we go ahead and get into the wide receivers? And since I'm talking, I'll go ahead and just do it. I have. Let's see here. I'm gonna say I'm going to say 6 wide receivers in the first round. Um, and I feel pretty good about that because there's some players that are very close to those guys in Devy Beth that are not that far behind, and yet I'm not even including them. So I'm going to say 6. I know the way that people talk about this, you probably think 8, 9, maybe even 10, but I'm going to go with 6.
Yeah, it's rare to get 8, right? Um, 7 is a lot. I think there was what 5 this year, which I think was probably more than should have been. Like I don't think some of the guys that got taken, Omar Cooper's not a first round draft pick in a lot of draft classes. So, um, I think I'm gonna lean towards 7 because I do think this is such a strong wide receiver class. And if I'm just looking at it right now, I like, I've got 4 that I feel like I'm very comfortable saying are first round picks already. Um, and then like as I get further down the list into like my day 2 guys, I really think that there's enough of those day 2 guys that like 2 or 3 of them could easily just propel themselves into that first round conversation with a really good season. A lot of them are changing which team they are on, so they're going to have a different opportunity with maybe some better players, better quarterback play for some of them. And I think if, like I said, if 3 of those guys that I think are probably day 2 right now, out of like, we're talking like upwards of 10 wide receivers that I think will probably end up going on day 2 next year uh, in 2027. If 3 of those guys that I have right now, you know, have the season propel themselves into that day 1 conversation, which is entirely possible. You start thinking about guys like Deshaun Stribling, who went essentially as a first round draft pick at 201 in the NFL draft. There's always guys like that too. Yeah, I can't remember Xavier Legette, guys like that who the NFL just falls in love with for whatever reason that end up going on day 1. There's going to be some of that as well. So I'm going to say 7 just because this class is so deep um, that I really feel that 7 is kind of a safe bet, honestly.
Well, I didn't think that we would get this high actually for guesses. My
Ooh.
first instinct was to go with 5 because, I mean, yes, there's been some classes in recent years where it has been at 6, but I think all in all, when we look at, okay, there's some quality quarterbacks. We haven't got to the running back position yet, but maybe we get some guys there in the first round. But tight end position, you guys thought maybe 2 may work their way in. I know other positions are intriguing in this next class as well, though I haven't dug very deeply into those other positional groups. But I'll just say that getting 7, that's really rare territory for sure. We've even had classes in years past, much less talented classes, of course, where we've only had a couple. So I'm not saying this is not a 2019 year where it was like Hollywood Brown and Keel Harry. Like this is a very talented class coming up here in 2027. So I get the higher amount of picks. But at the end of the day, I mean, do I think that there's enough guys that the NFL will be completely convinced on? Because, just getting into a couple of names there that I would consider, it's like Bryant Wesco. He's got an injury history with that neck. I don't know how teams are going to view something that's so severe there. Well, I shouldn't say severe, but just involved with the spine. We've seen those guys drop in past draft classes, deservedly or not. And then, even his teammate there, TJ Moore, who also is a very talented guy. I mean, is he going to be quite worthy of a first round pick? I'm going to go 5 here. And I understand that it's a little bit lower, but I'll say like Jeremiah Smith, he settles in as a clear, uh, what's the thing in bingo? Like the X in the middle, like the free square, whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, the free square, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But then after that, I do think there's a Cam Coleman, then there's Ryan Williams that should be able to slot in, but then there's room for maybe 2 more with my guess of 5. And I feel pretty confident that between like the Nick Marshes of the world, or maybe even a Charlie Becker, one of those Clemson guys, maybe a Deuce Robinson, maybe somebody else steps up, will get me to 5 at the end of the day when it's all said and done.
I mean, that's very fair. That there's no one that's truly proven. There's not six players right now that have truly proven they deserve that first round pick yet. Um, as you guys were sitting here, I'm always brainstorming of like, how can I make Devy Beth better? How can I make the next great tool or whatever? And I have this thing where, every year I obviously move the players up, their freshman, sophomore, junior, and when I move them up to their third year, they start getting they start kind of getting a discount or whatever, because obviously, like, you expect them to be better at that point. And so, excuse me, I was just thinking, like, it kind of gets wonky at the beginning of the year because it's moved them up to junior in Debbie Beth, and yet they haven't had a chance to do anything. They haven't had a chance to get better on the field or anything like that. And so I'm almost sitting here wondering, like, can I do like a months in school or something like that? I don't know. Like, I haven't figured it out, but I'm just sitting here brainstorming as we're potting, and I'm like, I think I'm onto something. I got something going, so I got to remember that. But that doesn't necessarily change anything, except for the fact that as it is right now, I have Jeremiah Smith as a tier 0 player. I have Cam Coleman very close to being tier 0. If he gets drafted right, and like, if he's top 10 in the NFL draft and stuff like that, he'd probably end up as a tier 0 player for me. At the very least, he would obviously be a tier 1 wide receiver. Then you have a tier break to Ryan Williams, and then another player that we have not discussed yet, so I'm not going to even mention them yet. I'm just going to say there's two more players that are in tier 2. Or what could eventually move up to tier 1, like that kind of thing. I'm expecting, like, by the end of the season they could move up to tier 1. So that's 4 players. Well, then I have a tier break, and I have 5 more players after that, but they're technically in tier 3 right now. They have to move up to at least tier 2 to even be considered, viable for that first round, or whatever it might be. So I'm with you. I guess it's just one of those things where, like, there's enough players to where I could see it, and there's enough hype on the class to where I feel like people are going to force it. Teams are going to force it. NFL draft nicks are going to force it, and they're going to be like, you got to get TJ Moore in there. You got to get Jace Brown in there. Whoever it is, like, you got to get these players in there. And next thing you know, there's going to be 6 in the first round. There's always that surprise player. Like, Andy was saying, like, we weren't expecting Omar Cooper Jr. to be a first round pick. We all like Omar Cooper Jr., but did we think that he was a first round talent? Maybe not. It obviously doesn't hurt him, as a prospect or anything, that he got first round draft capital. But, thinking, like, there's probably one that always squeezes in. So I could easily see 5, and then give me the one that squeezes in. And that's what, gets me to 6. But there's so many names that could be that 6th guy right now. And that's the great thing about the class. Even though they haven't taken the step like we maybe hoped that they were going to, there's enough guys that can take that step to where we can still say, hey, it is definitely possible. And we've seen crazier things happen than all of a sudden a Bryant Wesco Jr. being the 6th guy, or a TJ Moore, or a Nick Marsh, or a Charlie Becker. Like, one of those guys could easily be that 6th guy when it's all said and done. And there's obviously some other players, some deeper rostered players like Ian Strong and players like that can end up being that 6th guy if they hit right when it's all said and done. But I think everyone knows the wide receivers are a strength, and just because we're kind of running low on time here, we went long on the tight ends for some reason. Why don't we get into the running back class? Because I think this is the one that's going to be the most interesting, and maybe we'll have the most differing opinions on, because I feel like I have a rather spicy take, so I will kind of save mine. And Aaron, why don't you start? Or no, you start us off on the tight end. So Andy, why don't you start us off on the running backs here?
All right. Well, for the first round, I have zero running backs. I think it would take a Heisman level performance from what I would assume is Ahmad Hardy. I think he's maybe the only one capable of putting up those type of numbers where it's just like a record-setting season. Maybe Isaac Brown, but it just never seems like he's the guy that's going to get 20 touches a game. Like, that's not how Louisville's ever going to use him. So like looking at the list of guys who are draft eligible next year, at the top of Devy rankings, I don't see any of them getting drafted in the first round. There's not enough steam behind any of them. Most of them are going to be in some sort of rotation, and not like a Jeremiah Love rotation where he's still getting a ton of touches, like an actual, 60-40 split, maybe even closer to 55-45 split, with the exception of like Kawan Lacey and Jaden Baugh, maybe. But, those guys just don't have the multi-dimensional tool set that would be required for a team to take a shot on them in the first round. So I'm going to go with 0, and I feel pretty good about it. Having said that, this year is a year where we had 3 running backs taken in the first 3 rounds. I think that number goes way up in 2027. I would say easily tripling that. Like, give me 9 running backs in the first 3 rounds. Probably a little bit more, but 9, it feels like a safe number. Based on who we have coming out next year. I don't want to run through all the names or anything, but there's a lot of like really solid day 2 running backs. All of them have stuff to work on, stuff to get better at. But for the most part, I think we could comfortably say that there's going to be a lot more running backs that we're drafting near the top of our rookie drafts in 2027, which will be nice after what happened to us this year with Kalen Black being the only other day 2 running back.
Yeah, and that's an important point, is that, while obviously we love first round picks of, any nature, it's not as important with the running backs for them to be first round picks. Second and third round picks are obviously still very important for running backs. Not necessarily as much for, the other positions, but for running backs, people have said, oh, the fourth round is the new third round for running backs, and the third round is the new second, and so on and so forth. So I like that you brought that, and I will definitely include the same first 3 rounds in my analysis. But Aaron, what do you have for us? Although I thought it was going to be kind of, controversial, and after Andy talked, I don't know if I'm going to be quite as controversial as I thought.
Yeah, no, I go back and forth here. Originally had 0 as well. and then right before we started podcasting, I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll go with the 1 there. So I'm really 50-50 on it, right? If there is some betting odds, I mean, I think 0.5 is a good line there, right? For a little over under, I'll go with 1 to differentiate myself, because. Okay, I'll say this. Andy even said it. There's a lot of very solid running backs that are out there right now in college, but lacking maybe that star power at this time. But give it 1 more year, and I think there is a guy who could sneak into that first round. And so think of it like past years. We had a Jadarian Price who was split backfield, but snuck in the first round. Team reached on him. Team reached on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. A team reached on a timeshare back in Josh Jacobs back in the day. Rashad Penny even went as a G5 guy in the first round. We have to go back a few years, but yes. And yes, there's plenty of classes where there were solid backs who ended up like there's 0 day 1 guys like the Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, James Cook draft. Like that draft class was really good. Nobody went in day 1 from that running back room. So it is, risky saying 1 when there's not really a top guy at this time, but I'm just willing to take a chance that somebody emerges. I still like Justice Haynes a lot. I think that Ahmad Hardy was a fair shout out, but I mean, he got shot this offseason. Like the guy, I mean, seems like he's recovering, he's rehabbing already, but that's just going to suck because he's already splitting a backfield. Like the guy was not a workhorse last year. He was literally splitting time. I think that continues. Same thing with Isaac Brown. I think Brown could make a great case for it though, because he could shred and just dominate at the combine. He's so fast and electric. Teams might want to get that next Devin A. Chain or just list out all the fast guys at the running back position. And then even like a Kewan Lacey, who I don't really like that much, but I mean, if he has just a workhorse monster year, some team could say, you know what, end of the first, let's just take a shot on a guy who's big, somewhat fast, and let's try to roll with him at the running back position. So there's just a bunch of names I listed off, and there's more guys who I guess could emerge as well, but I'll say 1. for the running back position.
All right, so now I gotta figure out who I'm agreeing with. First, I gotta agree with Brett. He's in the chat and he says, "Thanks, guys," and he says, "Great show so far, and we appreciate you listening." And yeah, I agree that Andy and Aaron are doing a great job here. As I'm fumbling through my words, I am trying to figure out: do I want to do one? All right, here's what I will say. I'm gonna kind of caveat it. I'm gonna take the weak approach or whatever. I don't think there is a round one running back in the class, but I think there will be a round one running back drafted. So I think I'm gonna go with one as well. I don't think that I agree that it should happen, but I didn't necessarily agree that Jadarian Price should have been a first round pick. Or you had mentioned, Aaron had mentioned some other players, Josh Jacobs, who probably shouldn't be named right now, but yeah, don't check the news. But there's always somebody always sneaks in, kind of like we were saying with the wide receivers and stuff. There's always one that sneaks in, and some team always seems to fall in love with one player, and there's always a team that's desperately needy. Like Seattle. I mean, look what they had to deal with. They lost Kenneth Walker. They had Zach Charbonnet tearing ACL right at the end of the year. Like, they had to draft a player, and they're in this, obviously in Super Bowl contention time. Like, they're like, hey, we need a player. There's always going to be a team that desperately needs that running back or whatever who's going to draft it. But I don't think there's actually a player right now that I would say is ready. Ahmad Hardy would have been probably the closest to it for the class, and yet obviously we know he's dealing with some issues. I will say, who was it? Brian Johnson from Washington that got shot, and and he ended up being fine and playing the whole season and everything like that. So, like, I'm not saying just because you get shot you're going to be fine, or the opposite of it. But I guess when we think of being shot, we think of this whole like detrimental thing. But like, if it didn't clip an artery or whatever, it very well could just be not that big of a deal when it's all said and done. We have no idea is the real point. So, he could be back in a month. He could be back in a year. We really don't know. And so at this point, it's really hard to say. But Ahmad Hardy probably would have been my pick. But that being said, I'm looking at one. So I don't have, once again, I don't have any tier one running backs, but I have one, two, three. I have three tier two running backs, and then I have one, two, three, four. We'll say five tier three running backs, and I feel like any of those players could be drafted in the first couple of rounds. Obviously, I wouldn't expect all of them to be, and I wouldn't even expect all of them to come out, just because of the way NIL has worked and all that kind of stuff. That we would see some of them going back, some of them falling off, that kind of thing. So I guess I don't remember the number Andy gave for like total round 1 through 3 picks, but I'm gonna go with, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go with 6.
I said 9 because I think day 3 is when you start to see like some weird running backs come off the board, maybe even some special teams guys. But
Okay.
I think 9 from a running back standpoint, but I think 6 is probably a closer number to like Dynasty rookie draft relevant running backs, like guys that you're going to be actually drafting in the first 2 rounds of your rookie drafts. But there
Yeah, that's
probably
fair.
will be some other guys that get taken that you're like, what? Why are they taking this guy in round 3 when so and so's still on the board?
That's fair. What do you think, Aaron?
So to be clear, guessing the amount of guys between day 1 and day 2.
Correct. Did I
All
say
right.
day 3? I meant round 3 is what I
No,
meant.
no, day 3 was thrown out there, so I didn't know if we were including fourth round or something. Anyways, so between day 1 and day 2, I already said 1. I think that there will be at least 5 more guys. Let's go 6 more guys there on day 2. So I'll go 7 ultimately between day 1 and 2 this next year.
I like it. Who's your last guy you're throwing in there?
Last running back, like one more name.
Yeah, like you said seven. Who's your seventh guy? Who's like the guy that you're like, all right, he's gonna squeak into day two, and he's gonna be the guy.
Yeah, right. Sometimes we have to pick like a really random dude. But for me, I mean, I like Justice Haynes, so that's one. Maud Hardy, Isaac Brown, Keon Lacey. We're at four already, and then five, six, seven. I guess I gotta get a couple more guys. Just trying to think of like a Jordan Marshall sneaks in there. Not that he's special, but I think he's solid enough. They're at Michigan this year. Maybe a Darius Taylor if he stays healthy. That's always a big if with him, right? Deshaun Bishop out of Tennessee, could see him having a very, very lucrative season. A lot of carries, a lot of opportunity there. And
That's
then,
who I was looking for was Deshaun Bishop
yeah,
to see if he was
yeah.
that was like your sixth, seventh, whatever guy. I'm like I think I'm right there. Like I'd probably I think I said six, and I'm kind of leaning as Deshaun as my sixth guy there, and I feel like after that you're probably looking at a lot of players that are going to go in the fourth round. I would assume. Not that that's even a death knell for running backs nowadays. Once again, the fourth round is the new third round and that kind of thing. But for this purpose, I think I'm kind of looking at Deshaun Bishop and saying like that's my last guy for day two, and then I'm kind of out after that.
Yeah, and my last guy, the next two are just in contention for that last spot or the six and seven spots, whatever. Dalen Smothers, Hollywood Smothers going to Texas, and then Wayshawn Parker, Utah running back. I still really like the talent, the explosiveness there, and I think there's great opportunity for him again this year.
I like it, Andy. Who's your ninth guy? I guess.
I mean, I go down further down the list. I mean, maybe it is Aeneas Williams at Notre Dame, who has like the quintessential Notre Dame running back season. Um, Maybe it's Cameron Dickey, who everyone's sort of like throwing to the side. They're like, Quentin Joyner's coming back, or maybe Jacoby Williams if you're looking at another Texas Tech running back. Maybe one of those guys separates themselves and puts together two solid seasons. You've got Waymon Jordan and King Miller. If one guy takes over as the main guy at USC, I really like Mark Fletcher as a guy to comfortably be a day two pick. Um,
L.J. Martin,
he, what's that?
L.J. Martin,
Yeah,
out of
LJ Martin's a guy
BYU.
that like stacks a ton of yards. Um, you know, you could even you could
Jaden
throw
Baugh.
out. Yep, there's also
The
Jaden
team will
Baugh.
team will probably be interested in him unless he flops at the combine, which is very possible. I don't think he's going to test fast. Or Nate Frazier, right? Another favorite of the Devy Devotional podcast. Georgia running back, explosive testing metrics. I could just see him going day two, even though I know we don't like him,
Rutgers.
right? We don't want to mention him, but like Nate Frazier, I mean, he gets talked about as like a top five guy in the class all the time. It would be unwise of us to at least not throw him out as that possible ninth guy, even if we don't love it.
You guys are gonna make me do it, aren't you? I did not want tonight to be the Jaden Baugh like extravaganza. I don't even think we have time for it. But
No, we
We
got
don't
to
have
do that
time for it,
another
John. You
night.
have to bottle it
This'll,
up.
this'll take
We'll get you
time.
charged up another time.
all right, all right. I'm not gonna go crazy tonight, but I'm just gonna say, people, just like we talked about with the QBs with adjusted yards per attempt, you can go to the basics. Okay, PPR points per touch for running backs is very, very important. That's all I'm going to say for tonight. But I'm going. We have a whole thing coming for Kewan Lacey and Jaden Baugh because it's not pretty. And I really wanted Mark Fletcher to come out this year, and he didn't, and that kind of killed me. So I, as much as I would love for him to come out next year, like they were in the national championship game, and he still didn't come out, even though he like looked really good all throughout the playoffs and everything, and he still didn't come out. That just leads me to believe that like the NFL is telling him something that we don't really want to hear. As much as I like him as a player, and I've been a big fan, this is not like me. If anything, I'm admitting defeat. But I don't think I can do it anymore with Mark Fletcher. But the nice news is there is a lot of players to like at the running back position. The bad news is there's really no top tier players right now. There's definitely not a Jeremiah Love by any means. And as much as people would like you to believe that, and that's even if we get into other classes and stuff, they're just that player's not there yet. Not to say that it won't be there by the end of the year, but right now there is not that Jeremiah Love prospect, your Bijan, your even your Genty, whoever. There's not that level of prospect that's even close. And I actually put just to double check. I even put Jeremiah Love back in to Devy Beth just to see where he would be, and just to like make sure I wasn't like missing anything. And I'm like, nope, these running backs suck. So yeah, there's a lot of depth, but there's not a lot of great or top end players, and so that kind of makes you think like, all right, we talked about what we say. We said 4 QBs. We said 1.5 tight ends. We'll say. We said what? Well, no, we only said 1 running back. Yeah, 1 running back, and then we said what, 5 to 6 wide receivers.
We had 5, 6, and 7 for wide receivers. So
yeah, so 6.
Yeah.
So we'll say 6 wide receivers. I mean, that is not even a full first round of players. That's 11.5 spots if I'm doing my math correctly. And we have 12 first round picks in a rookie draft. So, I mean, not to say that there's no other players or it's not going to matter or anything, but generally when you're talking about those like generational rookie drafts and that kind of thing, you're talking about 2 full rounds or at least a round and a half full of players where you're like, I would pay a future first for this player. I would pay this year's first. I would pay multiple first, whatever it is. Like I would do that, and I don't think we're there. I would say after talking it through, we're definitely not there.
Makes you think though. Maybe it is generational, huh? Just kidding.
And I know other people have mentioned it where it's like, hey, it's generational because you have a generational player, and maybe Jeremiah Smith actually could be generational. That is very possible, and I don't throw it around lightly. And so, but I will give him the possibility of being that player. If he continues on like he has been the first couple of years, he probably will be generational as a prospect when he comes out, and that's what people look for. But everyone else is essentially like, oh, this is a good class. So let's just not get too over our skis, and remember that even though the 27 class is good and people like it, that if you're trying to make moves and stuff, don't be scared to sell those 27 first if it makes sense. Don't go out of your way to sell them. Don't just sell them to sell them. But if you find a trade that makes sense, don't be scared to sell that 27 first because you're like, oh, but I could get a generational pick here, because there's literally one player that could be generational and everyone else is pretty damn good. That's about it. So I think this is a good exercise to go through. Obviously, we'll get into all of these names and even deeper names and everything. I haven't even mentioned Keywan Brown yet, who's like one of my favorite players who doesn't get any love whatsoever because he's essentially a backup. But hey, Jadarian Price was a backup and he was a first round NFL draft pick. So we'll see what happens all throughout this season, and we have a lot more Devy talk to do in the near future. Aaron, you were on a boat. You had a lot of time to think. Andy's tired, so I'm not going to throw it to him. I'm going to throw it to Aaron. You had way too much time to think. Give us some words of wisdom. Those, not shower thoughts, but boat thoughts.
Well, fair enough. I like this upcoming class. I think, like John said, don't be afraid to send a 2027 pick if it makes sense getting a high-end player in return. But at the end of the day, we still need to look at our C2C rosters, our Devy rosters, Dynasty rosters, and just acquire quality assets, right? High-end players. And so be selective within that trading process. If you want to capitalize on some of the hype that is going to come around for the 2027 class, make sure to do it, obviously, in that smart way, getting a lot of really good talent or just one really, really good player, whatever that pick ends up projecting to be. If it's early, middle, late, obviously that's going to influence your return. But yeah, no, just be selective out there. Don't rush into trades if it doesn't feel right. Maybe it's not a good time. Just don't force it. But at the end of the day, I like making moves in leagues too. So stay active out there. Stay having fun in your leagues.
Absolutely. That's the important part, is having fun, making trades, getting moves done. We got to get more trades done in C2C leagues and Devy leagues. It just doesn't happen enough, and it's a shame. And it's just because people don't know how to properly value these players and picks. And we got to get to a point where we can do that for people. But we appreciate you guys listening. We'll obviously be back in your ears as soon as possible to talk more Devy, C2C, Dynasty, all that kind of good stuff, Cornerstone, whatever you got. We're going to talk about it. We're here every week. We appreciate everyone checking us out. And in fact, I would have to say, like, once I figured out that my message requests were hidden from me, I actually do appreciate how many of you are reaching out, starting to get some great feedback about the shows. We are seeing the numbers rise. We appreciate all of that. We would like to see more people come visit us on the YouTube channel, but hey, we're seeing the podcast numbers rise. We're seeing the YouTube channels rise. We're seeing all that. So we cannot complain at all. We appreciate everyone that is coming over and joining us and listening and going back and listening to the old pods as well, which is great to see. It's not, you're not just listening to the new hotness. You're going back and finding out what makes Devy Devotional. So we appreciate all that. We will be back in your ears as soon as possible. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.